Are you wondering how you can practice for hours but your playing still doesn't sound like jazz? Most beginners miss 3 essential techniques and end up stuck wasting practice time. Now, I've helped hundreds of jazz beginners build their skills, and in this video I'm gonna walk you through the exact steps that help my students so that you can fix your phrasing, make your chords groove, plus that one thing your rhythm is missing, without wasting time or feeling overwhelmed. Let me first show you a phrasing technique that is surprisingly simple, and honestly, I don't know why nobody teaches this. Nail this and your phrasing will sound 1,000 times better, it will level up your rhythm, and you'll finally get that real jazz flow in your playing. I'll break it down in 3 steps. To start, listen to how a master like George Benson uses this in his solo on the jazz blues, Billy's Bounce. It doesn't get much better than that, but now compare that to a typical beginner jazz line. Can you spot the difference? What makes George Benson's example so much better? It's not easy to recognize, but it's actually simple once you know what to listen for. Now you might think it's just about using chromatic notes, those in-between notes outside the main scale, and that is important, but it's not the whole story. You can easily sound just as flat and boring, even with a bunch of chromatic runs. The real difference is in how the melody flows. If you look at the 2 examples side by side, you'll see that George Benson's line is like a roller coaster. It's exciting and full of movement, always heading towards those strong chord tones, so the notes that fit perfectly with the underlying chords, but also changing direction very often. Now the beginner line uses the correct notes, but there's no excitement, no energy or surprising twists. So you need to add that kind of energy to your solos without just sounding random. But how do you do that? You probably already know this exercise, but trust me, don't underestimate it. It is much more powerful than you think, and this is about so much more than just the notes. Let's take a G minor triad. Now the formula is simple. For each note, play a scale note above your target note and then a chromatic note below it. If you do that for all the notes, then you have this. These are what is called enclosures around each note of the G minor triad, small melodic moves that lead to a target note, in this case the G minor chord tones. Now you might be thinking, that's just a boring technical exercise, how could that possibly make my solo sound better? But you'd be wrong. Check out the George Benson line again. Just on the G minor 7 chord he uses 3 enclosures to set it up. So one that leads into the bar, then another one that targets the root, and finally one that helps transition to the C7 smoothly, targeting the 3rd of that chord, the E. But why do enclosures work so well? Now it's pretty simple. They change the direction of the melody, create tension that resolves beautifully on a chord tone, and give your lines that real forward momentum. Let me show you how much difference this makes even with a basic G minor 7 arpeggio. Like this, nothing is happening. It's all moving in one direction, it's pretty flat. Let's add an enclosure before the G. So you have 2 options, the ascending enclosure or a descending enclosure. Both options sound more interesting than just playing the arpeggio, but in this case I think the ascending enclosure adds a bit more excitement. But you don't want to make this a rule. Sometimes the descending enclosure is the magic touch. For example, if you target the 3rd B flat, then here's the ascending enclosure. And here's the descending version. Notice how the descending enclosure changes the direction of the melody twice, so. And try to give the C, the 2nd note, an accent on that one end, because accents on offbeats just give your line that real jazz bounce. Now you can also use enclosures with scale melodies, so take a simple run like this. This sounds a lot better with an enclosure around the 1st note and an extra chord tone at the end so that it doesn't end on a downbeat. Enclosures might take a bit more work to internalize, but they are absolutely worth it. I help students master these in my course, the Jazz Guitar Roadmap. If you want to dig deeper into that, check it out, there's a link in the description. Now chromatic passing notes are also fun, but nowhere near as powerful. Just look at the George Benson lick. He barely uses passing notes and it's all about the enclosures. And here's something even more useful. If you play jazz, you probably spend more time comping than soloing. So let me show you one of the best things you can do with simple jazz chords. When I started out, I thought jazz was all about memorizing hundreds of big, complicated chord shapes. I spent hours drilling them, but when it came to actually playing a song, nothing fit. Here's what I wish someone had told me. Jazz comping isn't about knowing a million chords. It's about knowing a few great ones and using them well. And that's where shell voicings come in. Think of them as the skeleton of the chord. Just 3 notes that give you the core sound and keep your comping flexible and musical. They're the perfect place to start with jazz harmony, and later also a great foundation to build and expand on. You only need 2 sets of shell voicings, one with the root on the 6th string and one with the root on the 5th string. These shapes fit together so that you can smoothly connect chords in any progression. For example, here's a 2-5-1 in C major using the 6th string root. And of course you also have a version that has the root on the 5th string. Instead of just memorizing a million shapes, focus on these 3 things. Play songs, use the voicings in actual music, not just exercises. Focus on the rhythm, so great comping is about timing and groove, not just fancy chords. And split the chord. Separate the bass note and the chord tones to have more to improvise with. Here's an example of how you can split the chord on a 2-5-1. Mastering these shell voicings set you up to explore all the cool stuff later, like rootless voicings, chord extensions and substitutions. But remember, none of that matters if you can't play clear harmony with a rock-solid groove. In jazz, that is what really matters. Now, let's dive into the rhythm skill that most beginners overlook, and often that's actually the reason that your jazz feel isn't really nailing it. In jazz, rhythm is everything, and one of the most important but least talked about rhythms is anticipation. And what does that mean? Now, it's when you hit the chord just before you expect it. For example, listen to this line moving from D minor 7 to G7, and notice which note lands right on the 4 and. Did you notice how the line played B on 4 and, which meant that the G7 was coming in before beat 1? Anticipation is a key ingredient that gives jazz its light, forward-driving feel, but for most beginners, it's tricky to get it right. Luckily, there's a simple exercise to help you learn it, even if it sounds a bit backwards at first. To get comfortable with lines that end on the 4 and, you actually want to practice rubato, and that means playing out of time, focusing on the flow and the notes, but not in a strict tempo. Try improvising 8th note lines where you're not locked into a tempo, but you're still always aware of which note you're playing. For this exercise, try to start with 4-note phrases and end with a clear target note as the 4th note. When you practice like this, you'll start to hear the flow of lines that land on the 4 and later it'll feel much more natural to get this rhythm into your solos, making your lines sound relaxed and add that syncopation that is really an important part of jazz. Now that you've got rhythms that you can use in both your solos and your chords, it's time to open up how you think about chords so that comping and chord solos get a lot easier. Joe Pass has an amazing strategy for this, and in the next video I break it down step by step so that you can use it in your own playing instead of memorizing all those different voicings. Check it out, learn jazz, make music.